Hello, Hess Jazz Don't Go, and welcome to the AARP and Outwards Presents Agents of Change, a two-spirit reflection on the International Day of World's Indigenous People. My name is Michelle Sauerjohn, Senior Associate State Director of Community Outreach for AARP Oklahoma. At AARP, we pride ourselves on being agents of positive social change. And as everyday innovators in aging, our purpose at AARP is to empower people to choose how they live as we age. And our vision is a society in which all people live with dignity, purpose, and are able to fulfill their goals and their dreams. Today's multi-generational discussion is an important one to our vision, and we want to thank our friends at Outwards for co-hosting. At AARP, we know our treasured elders' wisdom and vast experiences connect and ground us to our past, keep us mindfully present, while inspiring future generations to becoming better curators of our communities and cultures. While Generation Z has a true zest for being positive social change agents. They are passionate about addressing global and social issues and are invested in creating innovative solutions. When these experiences, wisdom, passion, and compassion are leveraged and combined, we have the ability to create stronger communities and improve the quality of life for all as we age. As Chief Tecumseh once said, a single twig will break, but a bundle of twigs is strong. As a proud citizen of the Muskogee Nation and a member of the LGBTQ community, I am personally looking forward to this conversation. And all of our panelists today, I want to thank you, Mado, for sharing your wisdom, insights, and light. It is your light that allows others to shine and live their best lives. At AARP, we invite you all to join us in being everyday innovators in aging by visiting us at aarp.org, aarp.org/Native Origins, and aarp.org LGBTQ. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Executive Director of the Outwards Archive, Mason Funk. Thank you so much, Mado.
My name is Mason Funk, and I am the founder and executive director of Outwards. I'm joining you from Los Angeles, California today on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen lands of the Tongva peoples. As a guest institution on Tongva land, Outwards has instituted the practice of making an annual Kuyam Nahua, a recurring guest exchange, to the Tongva Tarahat Pahaba Conservancy, the Tongva-led organization who received the first return of land back to the Tongva people. If you'd like to learn more about how to pledge a voluntary land tax to the indigenous peoples in your own area, there's a link about how to do that in the chat. If you'd like to see closed captions for today's webinar, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen that says Show Captions. And if you have any tech issues whatsoever today, our behind-the-scenes tech wizard, Jack McCarthy, is on hand to help. So please feel free to reach out to Jack in the chat if you need assistance. As mentioned, I'm the executive director of Outwards. Our mission is to record, preserve, and share the stories of LGBTQ+ elders across the United States, across the whole continent, to build community and catalyze social change. Outwards was founded 7 years ago, and in that time, we recorded nearly 300 interviews in 39 states plus Washington, D.C. I also want to highlight today the Mellon Foundation as an underwriter of this event and thank them for their very generous support for Outwards. And you can learn more about Outwards at the outwardsarchive.org, which is in your chat window. Now, I'd like to take a minute to introduce our moderator for today's event, Adam Parker. Adam is a queer, two-spirit, Northern Cheyenne and white writer who grew up in Montana and currently lives in Los Angeles. Adam studied film and gender at Harvard. Their novel, The Wasteland, won the American Fiction Award and the Forward Indies Book of the Year Award in LGBTQ+ fiction. Adam also wrote a live-action short film called The Roof, featuring two of today's panelists, Elle Frank and Beverly Little Thunder. And that film, The Roof, will be released later this year. Without further ado, please let me present Adam Parker.
Hi, Chev. Good afternoon, Adam Nahisheva. I'm Adam. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Mason, and the amazing work that you do at Outwards. It is truly an honor to be here with you and speak with these elders today. Of course, I have so many questions beyond what we can fit in an hour, but also please feel free to put your questions using the Q&A feature, and a member of the Outwards staff will send those to me. We're going to meet our elders one by one through short video excerpts from their Outwards interviews and then in person. First up is Marcus Arana, also known as Holy Man Bull, is a transgender and intersex rights activist. With the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, Marcus trained all police officers in transgender community awareness, integrated trans people into shelters, and helped draft protocols for the fair treatment of transgender inmates. Marcus has been active in the Two-Spirit community building since 2005. He is a former board member for the Native American AIDS Project, board member emeritus for the Montana Two-Spirit Society, and is presently a consultant on the Native American group for NCTE's U.S. Trans Survey. Holy Old Man Bull is the author of Discrimination by Omission, Issues of Concern for Native Americans in San Francisco.
My legal name is Marcus Arana. Most people call me Tio, which is Spanish for uncle. So it's kind of a nickname and an honorific. My Native American names are several. My Blackfeet name, which is my father's tribe, is Natui Nina Shtumik, which is Holy Old Man Bull. When I was given my Blackfeet name, all of the old ladies in the neighborhood were like, "Oh, that's a good name. It's got old man in it. That means you're going to live to be old. Oh, that's a good name. It's got holy in it. That means you're blessed." So what does somebody do with their gender identity when they're hiding it? Does it ever go away? Does it disappear? It wasn't until 37 that I finally came to grips with being transgender, that I even learned the word transgender. And it was at a staff meeting at Community United Against Violence, an organization in San Francisco. And one of the staff people says, "We keep talking about transgender people and offering services to transgender people, but we don't have any transgender staff members, and that's a problem." And I remember kind of weakly putting my hand up sort of halfway and saying, "Well, I've always been a man in a woman's body, but it's my karma and I've learned to live with it." And people kind of looked at me and said, "Okay." You know, didn't think much of it, didn't say much of it. 2 weeks later, the same conversation happened. We say we're serving transgender clients, we don't have any transgender staff members. And all of a sudden, my arm shot up in the air. And I said, "Yeah, you do. I am that person." And it was like squeezing a tube of toothpaste, where you squeeze it and all this stuff comes out and you can't cram it back in. You can't unring the bell. You can't suddenly unsay the thought. In 2004, I went to do a transgender education training for a group called the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits. And I met Two-Spirit people. Two-Spirit people are indigenous people who don't fit inside the heteronormative boxes of male and female. That's the best way to describe us. We're outside the box. And so I trained this group, and after the training, I said in passing, "Oh, incidentally, I have Blackfeet heritage." And they got very excited, and they said, "Oh, you need to come to the meetings and come hang out with us and, be a part of this." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about my people. I know nothing about my traditions. I'm a person of mixed heritage." And my friend Christopher looked at me and he said, "Oh, so that's the excuse you're using for ignoring your ancestors?" And I thought, oh, wow, he is right. I had been so whitewashed in my own world that I completely forgot about all of these thousands of ancestors in my life. And that was a life-changing moment for me, absolutely. How has being Two-Spirit affected me? it's affected me in so many ways. I'd say probably the most profound thing is this idea that I am an absolute embodiment of masculine and feminine, and that I don't have to disavow either one. So when I changed my name, for example, I chose the middle name De Maria, which is from Mary, because I wanted to carry Mary with me wherever I went in my name. I think that for myself as a two-spirit person who's also transgender, I'm a great ambassador. I'm an ambassador from the Indian world to the non-Indian world. I'm an ambassador between men and women. As a bisexual person, I'm an ambassador between lesbian and gay people. So in many ways, I think that two-spirit people are the balancing point, and that we're a very important part of the foundation to keep everything in spiritual balance.
Those are such powerful words. I was really struck by the part in that video clip where you said, I don't know anything about my people and transition traditions. And then your friend said, oh, so that's the excuse that you're using for ignoring your ancestors. And I was just wondering what advice you might have, especially now, for other people who might feel like there's something holding them back from connecting to their ancestors or other Indigenous people.
Well, I have to say, it's not that I didn't know that I was Blackfeet. It's that I didn't know what that meant because I didn't have anybody to teach that to me. And for me, what changed was when I went to a two-spirit gathering and offered tobacco to a two-spirit, Blackfeet two-spirit elder, Stephen Barrios, and said, would you please teach me? And he said, yes. And probably the best advice I would give to people is, we know who we are because our parents and our grandparents tell us that. And so you need to tread carefully because the Indian world can be very protective of culture. And you need to be quiet and listen and learn and find a way to meet people who are from your group that you know of and learn about your own culture and be of service to all Native communities as much as you can. Because it's not how much you are or whether or not you're enrolled, it's how active you are in community, because that's what it is. That's what I learned from my elder.
Right. I'm so glad Auntie Stephen could be that person for you. And I try to be the auntie at gatherings who has the tobacco to give to the Indigenous youth to then bring to the elder, because sometimes we get in a position of like, where do I get the tobacco? I just go see Adam. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more from you. Next up, we're going to meet Elle Frank in a video from an exhibit called Coming Out West that Outwards did. Elle Frank, who uses the pronoun po in contextual situations, is a Tongva Hashimem artist, writer, tribal scholar, cartoonist, and Indigenous language activist. In the 90s, Elle Frank co-founded Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, which assists 7 California tribes in the preservation and teaching of their languages. In 2016, Po organized the building of the first traditional Tongva canoe in over 100 years and paddled it up the California coast. Since 1992, Elle Frank has illustrated Acorn Soup, a Native history and humor cartoon that appears in the News from Native California. Po also helped to found and continues to co-organize the Bay Area American Indian Two Spirits Powwow, of which I'm happy to be wearing the t-shirt from the last powwow that Po helped organize.
I traveled with another Native before I was born, who then chose Canada, and I chose California, and our lives were similar, yet very, very different. I chose to be born here and be a California Native and come from this spot. The family that I was born into was really quite typical for California Spanish history. It was a family struggling in America to live up to the Joneses, and yet they were they were not Jones. My dad is Tongva and Ahashmem. In the school books, they call us Gabrielino and Juaneño because we were enslaved and built those missions. But we call ourselves Tongva. And the Tongva are in the entire LA basin, some into the San Fernando Valley. We're extinct now. We to ta ohora, we to ta ha me evet, horura ha hete ke yo yo. First time I heard Tongva and understood it, we were building the first canoe in 220 years, something like that. One of my tribe mates, her dad, he starts speaking. He was an elder man and he was raised hearing and speaking the language. And he started speaking, and up till that point, I had heard it through the ground, and I had read the words from ethnographers, linguists and all. All of a sudden, I realized I do know what he's saying. He's naming all the people, all the different birds and the animals. And I was so excited that I almost yelled it out right in the middle of prayers. Where we're from needs to hear the language, the land, the air, the animals, the plants, the people. The language has to exist. ICLS, AICLS, Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival. We created a couple of programs that have now gone internationally for Indigenous peoples to reclaim their languages. It's spawned other language programs throughout California. My art and my culture and my tribe have always coexisted. They've just had different voices. They express things differently. I made the first stone bowl by someone in my tribe in 200 years. And I didn't know I could make a stone bowl. I never even knew we made stone bowls. I made that first stone bowl, which I still maintain was actually made by my ancestors, because it's just too perfect. I could not have done that. It's as if I'm just unveiling what has already been there. It's always been a piece of it. Everything has a place. There's an order to that place. My grand order of the things was to become an artist, get your butt down there and do the work. People ask me when they find out, when I realized what and all I was, two-spirit, gay, queer, or whatever. And I just always knew. And I've never to this day have questioned or felt bad. I've seen so many people try to fight it, so many people be ashamed of it. I've never lost sleep over being two-spirit. It means everything and it means nothing. It's about the kind of person that I am. And after that, my orientation, my gender, my whatevers, what does that really have to do with anything? This dominating society has been here, such a blip in the history of humanity. We are comprised of mostly stardust. We have the attributes of stardust. And there is no gender in space.
Those are such beautiful words. In the clip we just saw, Al, you describe, and these are my words, you describe receiving ancestral knowledge. I'm curious if you would use other words to describe that in making the stone bowl, and perhaps in relationship to your identity, that it's not something to be questioned, it's just something that is. And I was wondering what advice you might have for people hoping to open themselves up to receiving ancestral knowledge.
Sure. I mean, it's a really complex topic and we could go on for days, but basically it's listening. Like when we're learning languages, we think the most important thing is to speak. The most important thing is to listen. And that informs our speech. So when we're hungry for it, I was incredibly lucky because the ancestors, every time I tried to be the fool, they stepped in and stopped me. So I've been really lucky. So I don't know how to, how that part of it works, but I know that it works. What does work is actually listening. All of this information that we say comes from our ancestors' genetic knowledge. It's not just from our ancestors, the humans, it's our ancestors, the sky, it's our ancestors, the trees, it's our ancestors, the ground we walk on. Just because it's covered in asphalt doesn't mean there's still no messages, that there aren't messages coming up from it. Ancestral knowledge is being willing to not fit even more in this society than we already don't fit. But that's okay, because I work real hard not to fit here. I work very hard not to fit. Some people call it decolonization. That's an awfully big topic. I just call it, I don't need to fit this. This is wrong. And so if you're hearing strange voices, or you're getting strange premonitions, or there's strange this, strange that, they're not strange. They're just strange to this world. Because this world says you have to turn on TV and get spirit with God, through TV, or drive up your car to a church, or I don't know, be blessed. I'm not trying to mock other religions. I'm just saying that's not for me. Our knowledge is there. It always has been there. And it's for us to pay attention, listen, work hard to hear. Yeah, I think that's it.
Nia S., thank you. Next up is Beverly Little Thunder, who is a great-grandmother, activist, and former nurse. From 1987 through 1995, she worked in HIV/AIDS education. She served on the boards of the Indian Health Center of Los Angeles, Butte County Indian Health Service, Southeastern AIDS Coalition, Battered Women's Legal Services, and Earthwalk. She founded a space of ceremonial teachings and ceremony itself for primarily Indigenous LGBTQIA persons who are often not able to attend their own tribe's ceremony because of gender. As an enrolled citizen of the Standing Rock Band of Lakota, she now makes her home in the mountains of Huntington, Vermont.
Sundance ceremony is one of the biggest ceremonies in the Lakota and Dakota traditions. And it generally happened in the summer. And people would pledge to dance for 4 days without food or water in exchange for answers to certain prayers. It wasn't until 1985 that I came out to the Native community. My lover and I and our children went back to South Dakota for ceremony. And when I told them that I was lesbian and that this was my partner, I was told that women like me were taken out in the desert and shot, and that only one of us would be allowed to participate in ceremony, not both of us. I came out of the lodge and I just started walking. I laid down under a tree and just cried and cried and cried, fell asleep. And I heard somebody calling my name, and it was my Hunka brother, my adopted brother. He said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Let's go pack up the teepee and let's go home." And I needed to hear that. And he reminded me of a dream that I had told him about, in which there was a sun dance. And it was all women dancing. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. And he said, "Well, maybe you're meant to do that." I went back to Arizona with my partner, and a year later said, "Okay, I'm going to do a Sundance here on the desert." And so that was our first women's Sundance. When I was turned away 40 years ago, I said, I'll never go back home until queer people are welcomed with open arms. Now, there are Two-Spirit gatherings all across the country, in different communities. That is progress. That is progress. I guess that's probably the beauty of getting to be as old as I am. I look back and I see all of these increments that Indigenous people have grown from, and how we have created a place for ourselves at the table. The gay and lesbian agenda of the United States isn't our agenda. We have different goals, different aspirations, and many of our people are beginning to wake up and insists that Two-Spirit people take their right place in the circle of being honored and respected. And I feel like that it's just the beginning. I feel like it's just the beginning.
Beverly, it's so lovely. And in the clip, you end with, this is just the beginning, based on the progress that we've achieved so far. What do you think are the biggest things that people can do to welcome Two-Spirit people back into the circle?
I think that one of the biggest things that everyone can do is really take the time to listen to the youth and listen without judgment and throw away all those preconceived notions that Christianity has drilled into their heads about gay and lesbian communities, and recognize that we are a part of the circle. And I see that happening. I see that happening slowly, not fast enough for some of our youth, I think. But for grass to grow, it takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in little increments. And I meet so many elders who still grapple with the idea of a Two-Spirit person. There are those that still believe that if you're a Two-Spirit, then you are very promiscuous. If you're a Two-Spirit, then you are a substance abuser. If you are Two-Spirit, you're never going to amount to anything in the world. And I think that our community has shown that to be so untrue. And our community has shown that in the contemporary world we live in, we have begun to do those things that we were meant to do and that we did do before contact, before colonization. But listening with an open heart, an open mind, and without judgment, realizing that judgment is something that Christianity taught us.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to welcome the other elders into this circle as we continue this conversation. And because I know it will color the conversation of other questions to come, I'm curious for each of your thoughts on how you would describe what is an elder.
Well, I have some thoughts on that. People started calling me an elder in my 50s, and I rejected that and said no. But as I have gotten older, I realized that an elder is someone with lived experience and someone who walks their talk, so to speak, and who walks always considering the footsteps of the 7 generations before them and considering the footprints that they leave for the 7 generations that come after them. And do so without judgment of themselves or of others. And for me, that epitomizes a true elder. And those are usually the people who have been following the Red Road, are their spiritual practices, and do so on a daily basis.
Funny. I mean, that's wonderful. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I do find it interesting, though, that I was around a group of young people at a Two-Spirit gathering, and they were complaining that their elder is, oh, we hold our elder in such high esteem. She says everything she says is just incredibly wonderful, incredibly smart and beautiful, but then I saw her smoke a cigarette. Oh no, she's not pure. She's not this, she's not that. I thought, wait a minute, and then this elder over there, oh, he did all this wonderful stuff, but then he said a cuss word. Oh no, he's not pure. He's not. And they're all yelling about different, and I tell them I said, that's not very fair. Being an elder doesn't mean you're dead. Being an elder doesn't mean you're a perfect Christian. Being an elder means that you're a good Indian. That's what being an elder means. I told them about how in Northern California, I'm sure in other places, an Indian doctor, she really likes this young man she's doctoring. Part of the cure will be, he has to sleep with me. So all kinds of things have gone on that don't... The scope younger people have, and many elders have, is now we must walk with our head up high and a stoic look on our face, and our blanket shall always be folded. It's like, no, man, I've been living a hell of a long time. I have a right to live exactly how I live, as long as what I do for my community is the best that I can do for my community. To not bring shame, to not bring trouble, doesn't mean I'm not shameful at times and troublesome at others. It just means that there are ways to be. We've gotten in a place where once you're an elder, you're an idol, which is, Joan Baez used to say, idols are best made of stone, Idols are to be listened to, and elders are to be listened to, and elders are to listen and use that experience and say, well, that's a really good idea. You're going to crack your head, but I'll let you do it. That's what elders are for. Sometimes you just got to let them crack their heads if that's what's going to happen. But the thing is that in our experience, we haven't learned to be saintly. Everyone thinks, the elders are saintly. Heck no. I could throw some words down right now and show you I am far from saintly.
I agree with all of the wisdom of my co-speakers. And I think the only thing I could add from my experience for me is, like Beverly, I was in the Two-Spirit community designated by Stephen as an elder in my mid-50s, and I felt very uncomfortable with that. I didn't feel that I had earned any of that. I'm a little bit older and I'll accept it now. But what I can say for me is about being an elder, it's also about showing up for the young people, that they need to see us, that they need to see older people, like Belle said, with all of our flaws, like Beverly said, those of us who walk with beauty and are flawed. And for me, I've been told a number of times, you're the only transmasculine elder, Indigenous elder I've ever met, or you're the first one I've ever met. And it's happened too many times. And that's why I fly to Montana to go to gatherings, so that I can show up and they can see what it is to be an older transmasculine Indigenous person.
Yeah, that's so important, that representation. I'm curious what interactions you had with elders growing up, or alternatively, another side of that question is, what types of interactions do you wish you had with elders growing up?
A couple of years ago, some kids were upset with me. They said, "Oh, you're so intense. We know it's because you're trying to save our people. You're so intense." And what they wanted was an elder who carries a little handbag and who is very soft-spoken. And I told them, well, that's just not me. So I did some introspection about that, reflected, and I realized that the elders around who raised me, they were the ones who not only waved their cane at you, but also hit you with it if you weren't fast enough. They were the ones who stood up in a crowd and said, "This is wrong and I will not participate." They were the ones who were like me. They recognized that I am, I'm a bit of a dragon if you cross me, and so they taught me where to put this dragonhood, So I really appreciate all of my elders, but they were what the Hawaiians called it, the Tita sisters. My elders were not easy and not always politic. But what they taught me is that at this point, there's no time for that thing you call politic. That we need to take care of our people now. The elders that raised me were just as adamant. And I just finished tribal canoe journey where Uncle Phil, I got up to go do something with my crew, and he sat me down. You sit. He says, this is elder training. So I'm still getting elder training. And I appreciate that, because eldership has knocked me for a loop. When you're extinct, there's who do you go to? And when you're extinct, now that you're the elder, who do you go to? So you have to rely on all those things you were born with that have grown, and all you have to rely on so much else that I wasn't sure about this elderhood thing. And now I just feel pretty much that at times elderhood is like being a Walmart greeter, and at other times elderhood is like it's perfect because the mean Indians are afraid of you because you're the elder now. So it's a very interesting place to be.
I have to agree with Al Frank that a lot of the elders that I was around growing up were the ones that would hit you with their cane if you did something wrong. They would chase you down the road. And for me, the majority of the elders that I grew up around were largely dysfunctional.
Mm.
And there was not a lot of teaching about spiritual things, not a lot of teaching about reclaiming the language, not a lot of teaching about ceremony. But that was a whole generation that had been affected by the boarding school era. And now that as I've gotten older, I've realized that there was a whole lot that was taken away from them. And I'm only grateful now that there was another set of elders in training coming up behind them who were willing to reclaim the language, reclaim the ceremonies, reclaim some of the values of the Lakota people, and share that with me. And I use that as sort of an inspiration to look at the kind of elder that I wish to be. That the example that I want to leave for the future generations. I must say that some of the raunchiest jokes I ever heard came from a group of elder women. And I have a mouse tattoo that everybody asks to see in a very strategic place. And so I hope that that will tell the next generation that comes that I am not perfect. I don't try to be perfect. And every bit of mischief they have gotten into, I probably have gotten into twice.
It's interesting because I've had elders at different times. My first elders would have been my grandfather and father, who were Blackfeet. And on one hand, my grandfather was proud of being Blackfeet, and on the other hand, he was very dismissive. And my father thought nothing of it and taught me nothing about it. And my grandfather didn't talk to me because I was female. So fast forward to the mid 2000s, and suddenly I have Stephen Barrios in my life, and I have a different kind of elder. And I'm taught with love, and I'm taught about, as Beverly says, non-judgment. And I'm taught about, all of the right ways of being being Blackfeet. And I'm lucky when I learn of my Amamutsa and Ohlone heritage on my mother's family side that I have an elder in Anne Marie Sayers who would teach me what it was, and people like Greg Castro and Karina Gould who will model to me what it is to be an elder in the Ohlone community. So I actually feel grateful that I didn't get whooped by my Indian elders. But I'll say that my white granny would say, "Get your ass in here before I hit it with a fly swatter." And that was her way of saying, "I love you." No, so.
Oh, that's funny. We have a question from the Q&A. Were there any two-spirit people for you to look up to in your childhood? And of course, I've seen your Outwards interviews. I've read your book, Beverly. So I'm going to add on an additional question. If there weren't any two-spirit people for you to look up to growing up, or were there any moments from your youth where that having someone in your life that was two-spirit would have been especially impactful?
For me, it would have been really helpful to know that there was another two-spirit person in my community, never mind an elder, but there were none. The first time that I can remember seeing someone who may or may not have been gay, lesbian, two-spirit, whatever gender, was walking past the bus station with my mother. And as we walked by, there was this woman standing against the building with one foot against the building, one foot stepped out, smoking a cigarette. And her hair was slicked back in what they used to call a DA or a ducktail. I'm here to tell you she was hot.
Yeah.
And at 8 years old, my head whipped around and I looked at her and she looked down at me and she smiled and she had green eyes. And I was mesmerized. And my mother's dragging me along. And I said, "Mama, why is she wearing men's shoes?" And my mother said, "Well, she's a homosexual." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "She loves people just like her." And that was not much of an answer. But that woman, the image of that woman stayed in my head and still does to this day, obviously, because I still think she was hot. So it would have made so much of a difference in my life if I had known that the feelings that I was having, that I was not the only Indigenous woman in the world who felt that way. I mean, I got married 3 times and had 5 children, made 3 men terribly unhappy trying to be straight before I finally realized that that was never going to work.
Yep. Wow, we must have seen the same person. Because these were the days. I'm of an age where this would have been the early 50s. And so all I had to look up to was Tonto on one hand and this woman who we would see throughout the neighborhood on the other. And everybody would shake their heads and smile at her, like, "Oh, what are we going to do with her?" And in the 50s, you had to be hyper masculine if you were going to be butch, if you were going to be a lesbian. So she rolled up her cigarettes in her T-shirt, and her cuffs were up and her hair was in that ducktail. Her eyes must have been green. She must have been cruising the whole neighborhood looking for us to make us happy. I thought, yeah, I like that. Yeah, which made everybody really unhappy that I voiced that. So that's one of the times I learned, I guess you shouldn't voice everything that makes you happy. But that was the only person that I ever saw. and or that I knew, that was obviously, as my parents would call her, a he, she. Her and Tonto, I held them close to my heart. And that girl from Sky King, that little blonde, that now I look at and I go, what was I thinking? But, I only had a few people that I could look up to where I resonated. And one was with Tonto and the other was with this woman who hung out with the men and didn't have to go in the kitchen after Thanksgiving and wash the dishes. That was it.
Well, obviously, my life would have been remarkably different had I had two-spirit people in it, since I was 48 before I got involved with the community. And like Elle, Tonto was my go-to role model because I was a child of the 50s. And it was Penny from Sky King. And I also had a tiny little crush on Penny. Don't know why, but obviously enough to remember Penny's name. But I digress. I think that you're looking at a generation of people who grew up in a time where people were either this or that. You were one or the other, and there wasn't room for anything beyond, no deviation allowed. And so those of us who came out post Stonewall or before Stonewall have had remarkably different lives than those of us who came before us. So I'm grateful to any of the two-spirit people who stomped down the grass in front of me and made my path a little bit easier to walk.
Yes, thank you. And to build off of these wonderful stories, I'm wondering if you could speak through time to that younger version of yourself that you just described. What would you say to that person?
I would tell the younger person, I would go back to about 5 years old, and I would tell them, you are loved unconditionally. Who you are is okay. Love that person that you see in the mirror, because that's the most important person to love. And that is probably the most important message that I would want to give to my 5-year-old self. Because after 5 years old, I grew up fast.
I would talk about patience. Have some, don't have some. Just think about patience. Sometimes your impatience is the thing to have because it's your creativity. It's going to connect you with whom you need to be connected to. When you need to be patient, those are the days that you sit with your mouth closed. Doesn't mean you're not impatient on the inside, but just mind your patience. Everything is incredibly exciting, but just mind your patience and pay attention and hold on.
Everything that my esteemed co-panelists had to say. It's the only thing I think I'd add. I was 5 when I knew my gender and then was forced to hide it because nobody would believe I was a little boy. So I really resonate with that, going back to that first place where you got told, no, you don't get to be this thing. And what I would say is, you are exactly who you're supposed to be. Creator made you exactly this way for a reason, which may not be known to you now. But life is like being in a little boat without oars riding on a river, and you're going to see lots of twists and turns in that river, and you don't ever know what's going to be around that. So imagine that it could be a nice sunny beach and not some great waterfall ahead of you. But come what may, don't sweat the little stuff, because ultimately it's all little stuff. So just enjoy the ride.
Yes, thank you. And, I'm sure I can speak for everyone, is saying that in those moments, you weren't just speaking to the younger versions of yourself, you're speaking to the younger versions of me, and everyone here who needed to hear things like that from elders like you. In the time that we have left in the next few minutes, I'd really love to hear what other thoughts you have about things you wish Indigenous youth would ask you, or things you wish people would ask you about in general, instead of all of the questions that I've been asking you, whether it be what you want to see the next 7 generations to look like, or how you cope with trauma, to how you cope with trauma in order to live and build something for the next 7 generations. Basically opening up the door and platform to you.
I think that we need to really take a look at what we're learning, the younger people. We're learning how to use language of the decolonization, but we're learning to use it, and it's still the same American English, American doctrine. Like, I would like something not to hear from the youth anymore, from Two-Spirit youth. All the rest, y'all can say whatever you'd like. But I keep running into Two-Spirit youth who say, when we disagree on something, they say, oh, it must be an intergenerational thing. And then they dismiss you because it's an intergenerational thing. Surely your old brain with all that gray hair on top, you're confused because you don't know the modern. It's like, how more insulting can you be? Of course, it's an intergenerational thing. That's what being a Native is. We don't throw one generation away and claim another. And if you are going to be whole, then you claim all generations. Everybody likes to use that. The round symbol with the black, the yellow, the white, the red, quadrants. And what they don't also realize is that, those also stand for man, woman, elder, child. You're all of these things. There is no intergenerational problem we're having. You're just argumentative and not listening. You came and asked an elder about something and you don't like the answer. So if you tell us it's an intergenerational thing, you go join another group of people then. Because yes, if you don't like intergenerational talk, then don't come talking here. There, did I yell enough? Get off my lawn. Let's throw that in there too.
I think that I would like youth that I encounter to stop saying to me, "You are so wise."
Sorry.
Because I, like Al Frank, am still an elder in training. At 75, I still am learning. I am still learning how to be a human being. And any wisdom that I have had all my life. It's just now coming into bloom. It's like a flower that, is planted. The seed doesn't automatically pop up and become a flower. It takes a while for it to grow. And these same youth that ask or say that to me look baffled when I say, but you hold the same wisdom. You're just at a different stage of that wisdom developing. And when you reach my age, you are going to be so far ahead of me that it's going to be phenomenal. And so it pains me when our youth don't understand the gifts that they hold inside. And I pray for a way that the generations coming will be able to see that inside themselves. Yeah.
I don't know so much. It's about what questions I wish would have been asked or that someone would ask of me. What I would say to young people is, do you realize that we're all elders in training and that we're all aging children? I think Elle just said the same thing. And that my question for them would be, what do you need to learn from me so that you can invest in those people who are yet unborn? What is it that I've done? Because good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So what is it about the years that I've spent here a little bit longer with you that I can impart from my experience to help you be prepared for helping those unborn and those who are coming after you? That's what I want them to ask me.
Do you have any last quick questions for each other?
Where's Pam?
She's being quiet in the kitchen. I have her well trained.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Beverly, Al, Marcus. It's been, if the people listening are anything like me, I'm sure we would love this event to go on for hours and hours. Along those lines, if you are a Two-Spirit person and want it to go on for hours and hours, I encourage you to search out different Two-Spirit gatherings, including the Montana Two-Spirit Gathering. Search out all of their books. I'm also going to put a link to an artist talk in the chat that L. Frank did at the Hammer Museum. I highly encourage you to reach out and do further research on these wonderful panelists and elders that we have today. Nia S., thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a glorious rest of your day.
No song.